now the war is going to end. Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO, and that's what's going to enable the war to end. The basic answer, which was neither side gets Ukraine, Ukraine gets Ukraine, was the right answer. But actually, when the U.S. had the upper hand, it couldn't accept that answer. It said, we have the upper hand, we can push that it's ours.
How will the war in Ukraine come to an end? Well, Jeffrey Sachs reveals that here in this clip in an interview with Piers Morgan. This happening as there's a peace deal potentially on the table, being mulled over by Trump and by Russia, with inputs from Ukraine. How did we get led into this catastrophe in the first place? And what's the biggest lessons learned that the United States citizenry and government should take from this bloodbath? Let's watch. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
This is a fast-moving story, and certainly the original 28-point plan appears to not be a final plan, but is now being worked on and I suspect diluted somewhat. But ultimately, when you look at that 28-point plan, can you see why a lot of people are very critical of it? Because it appears to be, on the face of it, giving Russia everything it wants.
Well, I think what's interesting is that the European response in practice is not very different to the 28-point plan. Europe made a number of changes, but in substance, this war is coming to an end soon, and it's going to come to an end on the basis that NATO won't enlarge, Ukraine won't be part of NATO, some land will be recognized de facto as under Russian control, but Ukraine is not going to acknowledge it as Russian. And that's going to be the way that the fighting stops. So I think the truth is we're probably coming close to the end of the fighting.
Why, though, would anyone on the Ukrainian side trust Putin, given that he took Crimea and given he's now taken, say, another 20% of land? We'll see what the final geographical boundary says. But why would anyone on the Ukrainian side trust him not to come back for more?
Well, the way that the agreement is structured is that if one side violates it, it ends all of the guarantees that that side has received. The idea is that this is a mutual or collective security arrangement, and it says that if one side violates it, the other side is free of any further obligations. If indeed an agreement is reached and Russia violates it, I think the full force of whatever the West would bring to this would immediately return.
I mean, it's not a question of whether or not Ukraine should trust Russia. It's how many more men have to be sent to the front lines in this catastrophe that's already claimed over 1 million of them by most estimates. And it's just preposterous to say that this gives Russia essentially everything they want. Under the Istanbul Agreement that happened in the early months of the war, that Zelensky was initially going to accept until talked out of it by Boris Johnson and by the Biden administration saying, hey, no, you fight on, we got your back. The Ukrainian army would have been capped at 85,000. That's what he was willing to accept under that arrangement. Now, under this 28-point plan, it would be capped at 600,000. It's something that Putin probably won't accept. And that's why the Russians have all this leverage. Of course, they're going to have more, feasible terms if this is a realistic plan that are conducive to their interests rather than Ukraine's interests when they occupy something like 20% of Ukraine's territory and something like 90% of the Donbass. So that's why it's more oriented toward the favor of Russia, because Russia's pretty much accomplished all of its war aims for the most part on the battlefield. There's nothing Ukraine can do about that. $200 billion in U.S. arms couldn't do anything about that.
So this is the basis of all peace agreements in human history, which is that both sides are exhausted. There is a tacit understanding, let's stop. There's some appreciation of what the causes for the fighting were in the first place, and they're somewhat imperfectly accommodated, and that's where we are. I think that this is the same here. This war was because there was a contest between NATO and Russia over Ukraine. That contest, in my view, as we've discussed many times, should have been avoided all along. There is such thing that neither the U.S. and Britain don't like and don't agree on. That's called neutrality. But in any event, that was what was rejected by the United States 30 years ago. Russia said, don't do that. The U.S. said, we don't listen to you. And in any event, the fighting took place. Now the war is going to end. Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO, and that's what's going to enable the war to end. We're just going to basically call it a day, and now the arguments are over the details.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I mean, I'm hoping the war comes to an end. I'm not totally convinced because it seems like Trump is willing to continue funding this thing to the end. I think he wants to get away from it politically, but he's not been willing to do what it takes to really cut and get out of there and let the Europeans take care of it. Let Zelensky be their problem. Why? Because of the entrenched military-industrial complex in the United States that make massive amounts of money siphoned from and extorted from the U.S. populace to pay them for the weaponry to fight on. They want this to go on for 20 years. It's exactly why Julian Assange, the heroic journalist Julian Assange, said in relation to Afghanistan, but it applies to Ukraine as well, they don't want a successful war. They want an endless war. They want this going on for all time to line their pockets if they can through this government corporate collaboration scheme. It's an empire building scheme at the same time, and this one's even more disastrous than Ukraine because it flirts with nuclear war against a nuclear power. It's absurd. And Sachs is right. The thing that the deep state hates most is neutrality. It wasn't good enough that Ukraine's government was going to be neutral under Yanukovych. He didn't even want to be expressly pro-Russian. He just said, I want Ukraine to be neutral. We're not going to be part of NATO. We're not going to be part of Russia. We're going to be neutral. Well, for that, the United States helped overthrow that government in 2014 in February during the Maidan coup. They called it the Revolution of Dignity, but it was really the Revolution of Duplicity.
But everybody's exhausted. Ukraine's losing on the battlefield. Europe doesn't really have anything to offer in this except words of leaders who have no standing in their own country anyway. They're all very unpopular, Starmer, Merz, Macron. So they don't bring anything to the table anyway. And the United States does not want to fight on for a principle which the U.S. started actually 30 years ago, that NATO will go wherever it wants, and it's not interested in fighting over that. And I agree with the United States on that.
I hope he's right. You know, that's a little bit more optimistic than I'll put it, but I'm not convinced the U.S. government wants to shut this thing down entirely, especially because the Trump administration has shown interest, if the aid doesn't keep pouring in, to just turn a proxy war versus Russia into a proxy war by selling weapons to Europe first, and then Europe gives those weapons to the Ukrainians, then the Ukrainians use those weapons against Russia. That doesn't solve the problem of being at odds with Russia and flushing American dollars down the drain in these stupid war-making schemes and this perverted sense of central economic planning through warfare. That's what the U.S. is doing in this.
Why fight over that?
You and I, we've talked about this a lot, and I've always valued our conversations about it. I feel I've learned a lot. I don't necessarily agree with everything you've said, but I've learned a lot, particularly about the history. And I can certainly, I can accept that Russia and Putin feel like there was unnecessary provocation from NATO, unnecessary encroachment, and so on. I can see that argument. But that doesn't necessarily change, does it? The fact that in the end, in 2022, he illegally invaded a sovereign democratic country. I mean, you can argue about why he did it and the reasons for it and the build-up and the logic and so on. But, I mean, we should be able to agree that the actual act that was committed when he invaded was an illegal invasion of a sovereign country, can't we?
Yeah, but there were several illegal acts all along the way. There was a U.S.-backed coup in February 2014, and there was an actual war with about 14,000 deaths that Ukraine was waging on the breakaway regions of eastern Ukraine. So the war started in 2014 whenever you have something like this, there's no start date. This is a game of narrative to choose one's start date. This is two sides going back more than 30 years contesting whether Ukraine should be neutral, whether it should be part of NATO, whether it should be part of Russia. And it led to war because what was the basic answer, which was neither side gets Ukraine, Ukraine gets Ukraine.
Exactly right. I mean, people can say that all day. A lot of like the establishment opinion is history began in 2022 with the invasion, but it didn't. This war began far earlier than that in 2014. And Sachs is right. It's really a matter of narrative when you think exactly this started. You could say it started in 1994 when Clinton made the decision to expand NATO to the east beyond the agreement set by James Baker and Mikhail Gorbachev. And the Russian ambassador, too, Hans Dietrich Genscher, in talking about this and setting those parameters as a gentleman's agreement that they wouldn't violate. But yeah, history didn't begin in 2022. We can say, we're against the invasion, but what does that even say? I mean, fine, as a moral question, yeah, I'm not for invasions that, kill innocents and kill conscripts. On both sides, by the way, and the Ukrainian conscript age has been raised in relation to that and as a response to that. But at the same time, this was provoked. It's just untrue to say it wasn't provoked. So yeah, it's about as useful as saying, 9/11 was wrong. Well, what kind of moral courage does that take? Obviously, we know it was wrong. We also know that the U.S. foreign policy provoked 9/11. That's not to justify 9/11. It's saying let's not put ourselves in these disastrous positions foreign policy-wise. In 9/11, it was militarizing the Saudi Arabian Peninsula and funding Israel and, conducting a crusade of starvation in Iraq. That's what Osama bin Laden said. So that's just the truth.
Was the right answer, but actually, when the U.S. had the upper hand, it couldn't accept that answer. It said, we have the upper hand, we can push that it's ours, not Russia's. That was the whole idea.
Professor Sachs, but what happens to a country like Russia, which, by common consent has committed myriad war crimes in the last 3 years? It's targeted and killed civilians. I think that's inarguable. It's kidnapped a reported 20,000 Ukrainian children. There was the massacre at places like Bucha. I've been there. Absolutely horrific what went on down there. There have been the sexual assaults and rapes of Ukrainian women and so on. So it seems inarguable. There's been a number of war crimes committed. Is it fair and just that at the end of this, assuming you're right, and this is the beginning of the end of this, that Russia emerges unpunished for any of this?
Well, if the United States were punished for all its war crimes, the world would be a better place. And if all countries were punished for their war crimes, if Israel was punished for its genocide before our eyes, if the United States was punished for overthrowing so many regimes and causing so many wars, if the United States were punished for the Iraq War, if the United States were punished for the coup in Maidan in February 2014, I'd agree with you.
Exactly right. The question is always over Russian punishment. When the CIA has a new boogeyman, that's all about what it's about. Never look inward. Never look at the absurd and tyrannical and oppressive policies of your own government. That's exactly right. And yeah, it sure seems like both Biden and Trump tried essentially the same plan to punish Russia. It was sanctions, it was sending in multitudes of dollars, sending in tons of weaponry and intelligence, and it didn't really get us anywhere. So what do you want to do, Pierce? Do you want to send U.S. boots on the ground? Because it pretty much seems like no political faction in the United States, even the liberal and conservative establishments that have supported this absurdity of a proxy war, have ever suggested doing that. Why? Because they won't. Because they know that it's just utterly impossible to sell that to the public. So yeah, punishment, that's not how agreements work. Obviously, that there would have to be some give and pull on both sides, but Russia's in the driver's seat. It's not exactly a question of how they can be punished at this point. They have the Donbass. I don't know what to say about stuff like this.
It would be great if governments were accountable, but what we like to do is say the the other side is the wrong one and not to acknowledge our own sins. For this, Jesus had it right. Why do you always point to the mote in the other eye when you have the plank or the beam in your own eye? To my mind, this is the basic point. I would love to follow your line, Piers. I agree with it. We should have accountability for all the crimes that are committed, and the United States list is so long. I've been tracking it for more than 40 years professionally. It's just one war crime after another, including complicity in a genocide in Gaza during the last 2 years.
Finally, Professor Sachs, do you believe we really are now on the verge of a peace settlement?
You know, I wasn't sure until I read the European counterposition to the U.S. plan. Now, again, what we're reading in the press may not be authoritative, so I may be completely off. But when I read the European plan, and it's basically tweaking the so-called U.S. plan, I thought, you know, we're probably near the end of this story. The fact is, Russia has almost won all of its war aims on the ground. And I think that the idea that this stops just about now, that Ukraine does not join NATO, that we have some kind of collective security arrangement so that nobody beats up the other side, this seems to be pretty much common currency now. I don't know where Zelensky stands on this. He rules by martial law. He's in a corruption scandal that's enormous. The Ukrainian people are exhausted. They cannot fight on anyway. I hope that this is over. It should be over. And at least the U.S. and the European answer, which was supposed to be very negative, isn't so negative. If that prevails, we could be at the end of this story, and we really should be.
Jeffrey Sachs, great to have you back on Uncensored. Thank you very much.
Always great to be with you. Thanks.
Yeah, man, we'll see. He's a little bit more optimistic than me. I read the original 28-point plan, and parts of it call for Ukraine to have elections within 100 days. You know, a constitutional amendment in Ukraine's constitution to say that Ukraine can't be part of NATO. That's what this has always been about from the Russia side. They've always said that that's our biggest hangup. Ukraine can be neutral, but they can't be in NATO. And that's what U.S. has been flirting with for, over 2 decades. It would cap Ukraine's military at 600,000, like I said before, under Istanbul, which Zelensky initially agreed to. That would have been 85,000. So he was willing to accept far less earlier, and this deal is not going to be better for him in terms of territory, but it could be better for him in terms of the military. It also calls for, a comprehensive plan in which there'd be a prisoner exchange, there'd be a non-aggression agreement with Russia, there would be a lifting of sanctions on Russia and the possibility of Russia possibly joining the G8 again. Some of these things, but it has been countered not only by the EU plan, but also there's news coming out tonight that Ukraine is creating its own adjustments here and is trying to basically poison the well on an agreement. If Trump is smart and he really wants to get out of it, I don't think he's smart, by the way, and I don't necessarily think he 100% wants to get out of it, but if he did, he would reject whatever Ukraine is saying, and he would say instead, Zelensky, this is your peace deal. Take it or leave it. If you leave it, we're pulling all support tomorrow or in 30 days or whatever you wanted to do. But if you do support it, we'll work with you to bring this to fruition. If you reject it, you are on the hook to just have the European support and the EU support and not US support. That's what I would do, and that's what I hope happens. So it fills me with joy to know that Sachs is optimistic about this. He's a smart guy. I'm a little bit more cynical. We'll see if this comes to fruition, but it does seem like we're certainly closer than we were a month ago. That's for sure. And I also wanted to show how I tweeted about this here. There was a video that came out talking about Zelensky's unhappiness with the 28-point plan and his recommendations to adjust it. Not like that's consequential at all. It's not like he's in exactly a good position for that. One accurate thing Trump did say back in March was you don't have the cards here. He doesn't, not at all, with 20% of Ukraine occupied, even though U.S. weapons continue to flow in. But the Kiev-approved version, as far as I see it, is Russia must endure regime change, give up nukes, give up Crimea and all the Donbass, pigs must fly, and the sun must set in the east. That's how unrealistic trying to use leverage from the Ukrainian position looks right now. So that's what I think. I hope this thing comes to an end. I hope Sachs is right. I'm not convinced of it, but I've been wrong before too. And I hope my cynicism doesn't override the truth that we could see in a possible peace here. It's time to get out of this thing. Like, it should have been yesterday. Trump's best campaign rhetoric was, I'll end that war tomorrow. I'll end that war in 24 hours. It was absurd. It was a total broken promise, but it didn't seem like he prioritized that promise at all until now, maybe. If this isn't sabotaged by Zelensky's attempt to twist this into something that the Russians could never accept and then continue to fight on for it. But I think Zelensky is fearing for his life, and it's not fearing for his life over Putin and Putin's power and Russian attempts to take him out. I think he fears for his life because of the right-wing Nazis and the Azovs and the Banderas in the country. The people that will be at his throat for this and any kind of movement in the direction of peace, wanting to fight on literally to the last man and pressuring him in that direction, along with, of course, the UK and the US, 3 years ago. But that's what we're getting. Let's see if it works out. Great conversation. I hope Sachs is right. What do you think about the 28-point plan? Do you think this peace plan has any chance to work out? What's it going to take? Is it going to be sabotaged by the Ukrainian counteroffer that's completely untenable and unacceptable to the Russians? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Piers Morgan. Whatever you think about Piers, he brings up good conversations. He has great debates on his show, and I appreciate this one with Sachs. And also, if you like this video, please consider supporting the channel as a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button below. And if you do that, you can help support the channel. And in return for that, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live on YouTube in the future on my channel. You'll be able to see those members-only videos that I have right away. Also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below, plug in your email. I'll send you a free copy in PDF form, no obligation whatsoever, just because I appreciate you viewing my channel. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.